Work at IH Valladolid in Spain. I think most of the schools here watching, so morning. Thanks for your support. Try and keep the heckling to a minimum. That would be appreciated. So I would like to talk about one of the ways in which we can deal with mixed ability in our classes. We're going to start off with just a quick discussion of the different ways that we as teachers deal with mixed ability in class. Then I'll go on to explain why this AIMS acronym is relevant to the topic of mixed ability. And then at the end, I'm going to give you a practical example of what we're talking about from one of my classes I did recently. I'm coming at this from more of a young learner angle, as that's where most of my experience lies. But I think the approach that we're going to talk about is relevant to different age groups and different levels as well. So first of all, we as teachers have lots of different ways of dealing with mixed ability in the classroom. To give you one example, we can adapt a task that we've got by making a slightly easier version of it for our weaker students, or making a slightly more challenging version of the same task for our stronger students. In the chat box, I'm going to give you 30 seconds or so to briefly write some more ways that you can think of for dealing with mixed ability in our classes. Okay, 30 seconds. Can you just briefly type any ideas you've got in the chat box? Okay, that's the 30 seconds. Thank you very much for your ideas. Here are a few that I thought of. Some of them are very similar to what you said, some of them slightly different. Just quickly then, so we might extend the task as, oh, my own school have said, very good guys, well done. By giving fast finishers something more to do. We might group students according to ability, so putting stronger students together and weaker students together and have them do slightly different things, or we might mix those ability groups so that the students can support each other. We use pair checking so that weaker students have the chance to compare their answers to something with maybe a stronger student before we talk about it as a whole class. For young learners especially, we might use non-linguistic goals. So the students who perhaps linguistically are a bit weaker, we can still reward them for something, whether that's a behavioural goal, something like that. And also we can adjust the amount of time that we spend with students. So we might spend a little bit more time with our weaker students, or we might spend a little bit more time with stronger students trying to push them a little bit further. One area of planning and teaching that perhaps we don't associate with mixed ability as often is our lesson aims when we're forming our lesson aims at the beginning of the planning stage. And it's that I would like to talk about. So our lesson aims, they show what we intend our students to achieve in a particular lesson. However, we all know from experience that not all students are going to achieve the same thing in the same lesson, because that's not how humans work. So if we know that different students are going to achieve different things, there are going to be different outcomes, then should this be reflected perhaps in our aims by having differentiated aims? One thing then that I think is worth asking ourselves at the beginning of the planning process is what we intend all, most, and some of our students to achieve in a particular lesson. And this is where the AMS of the AIMS acronym comes from. I think there are several benefits to thinking about this. First of all, it means that the mixed ability of our classes is in our minds from the first moment of the planning stage. I think that in turn then makes it easier to keep that in mind as we go through planning the whole lesson and then teaching the lesson. It also helps to build a very solid foundation from the lesson, because from the very start we know exactly what we want every single student in that class to go out of the lesson having achieved. I also think it helps to keep stronger students in mind. I think that dealing with mixed ability often gets misinterpreted as dealing with weaker students. Okay, that's part of it, but also part of dealing with mixed ability is pushing our stronger students to achieve the best that they can. And I think thinking about these differentiated aims can help to keep our stronger students in mind as well. So that's the AMS of the acronym, but what about the I? The I is for an individual student. Now, I teach still, and I know very well that in a lot of teaching situations, differentiating lesson aims to the level of the individual student is impractical. We just can't do it realistically. However, I think there are some situations, such as the ones that I've put on the slide here, where it is worth bearing in mind what we expect a particular student to be able to achieve, or how we expect them to perform in a particular lesson. To give you a practical example, a few weeks ago I did a lesson with a group of 6 to 7 year olds about the sounds E and I. In the course book, which is where I took some of the material from, it was intended as a phonics lesson, so linking sounds to spelling. I touched on that, but used it more as a kind of sound differentiation and listening lesson. So at the top, you can see what I expected all of my students to achieve in that lesson, which was to be able to differentiate between the E and I sounds in single syllable words. And they were all able to do that. Fantastic. Then I expected most of the students to be able to produce those sounds in single syllable words when they were repeating a model from me. In the event, all of them were able to do that. Some of them found it more difficult, but they were all able to do that. Great, very happy about that. Some students I thought would be able to make that sound spelling link between E and the spelling double E and I and the spelling IE, and be able to blend some letters to produce single syllable words from a written model rather than a teacher model. I knew, though, that some of the weaker students in the class wouldn't be able to do that. But fine, I did it anyway, and the stronger students were able to do it. Fantastic. And then one student who I've been battling with for the whole year, really, about his inability to put his hand up when he wants to speak. So pretty much a constant individual aim for him, a behavioural aim for him, is to put up his hand when he wants to speak. I'm going to finish with a few words of warning about this approach. First of all, I think it has to be an evidence-based process. We can't take this approach in lesson one because it requires us to know our students. And I think if we don't do that, if we don't make these decisions based on evidence, then we could wildly underestimate or overestimate our students' abilities, and that's not fair on them. We also need to be aware of their individual strengths and strengths and weaknesses. So while one student might really struggle in a certain type of lesson, a certain type of task, they might excel in a different type of lesson or a different type of task. So we need to be careful, as the third point says, not to put students in a box. So not to put student X in our weak student box. Not to put student Y in our very capable box for every type of lesson that we do. And the approach, I suppose the idea behind this approach is to form realistic expectations of what can happen in the classroom. It's not to encourage teachers to go in with a that'll do attitude. Okay? We're not trying to form kind of cast iron assumptions about what students can and can't do. It's about creating expectations for ourselves and taking those into the classroom so that we're better able to deal with the mixed ability in the classroom. However, at the end of the day, we need to give every student in that class the opportunity to do as well as they can. And if they exceed our expectations, fantastic. If they don't, okay, then that gives us some useful feedback for future lessons. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that's given you some